Hello and welcome to episode 143 of The Pitcher or the Hitter, the podcast by the M-SABR Dynasty League for the M-SABR Dynasty League. I am Cam,
I'm Sahil.
and we are back on a little bit of a regular schedule here, our second week in a row recording. We haven't done that since the regular season, but things are finally starting to heat up. The league is back.
Yeah, the league is literally back. ESPN did their yearly maintenance, and we were able to make some adds and drops. Notably, unlike previous years where ESPN kind of reset the IL situation, they either intentionally or just forgot. I'm not really sure. Um, kept all the players who were IL eligible to end 2023 as IL eligible to start 2024. I'm sure by the time you all are listening to this, you know that the way we're treating that is anybody who we know for sure is going to miss the start of the season is IL eligible. We tentatively are going to let everybody else who is listed as IL eligible be placed there on February 15th, but that could potentially be adjusted by how ESPN decides to handle injured players. But what it did create was a little bit of a window for people to add players because they were moved some of their guys to the IL. I know you and I took advantage of that, and a couple other teams did. So before we dive into our main segment, I think it'd be fun to talk about some of those players who were added. I think it is a pretty interesting bunch.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess starting with there was three closers added. I added Jose Leclerc. You added Robert Suarez and Alex Lang. Yeah, was added by Andrew. So three closers were added here. Yeah, looking to see the waiver report. Jose Leclerc, the only unsuccessful claim. You put in a claim for him. Well, yeah, the only unsuccessful claim that was already claimed by another person, as you put in a claim for him. I put in a claim for a guy who didn't end up mattering because I had my full list. But yes, Jose Leclerc, Rangers closer, added by me. I like the pickup. He was just the closer for the World Series winning team. Um, as of now, they don't have anyone else kind of uh, in that spot or anyone who can come in there. I know we've talked a little bit off air about, possible landing sites for Josh Hader. But as of now, it's Jose Leclerc, and I like that pickup. You picked up Robert Suarez. He's an interesting guy. Why don't you talk about him?
Yeah, Suarez was a guy I've always liked. I picked him up. Honestly, I think the last two off seasons I picked him up. One of the off seasons I picked him up and then flipped him over to Yuki, um, thinking that Suarez was going to be the closer. This was, I think, the year where they traded for Josh Hader in the middle of the season. They traded for Taylor Rogers at first, and he took the job from Suarez. I thought he was going to be the closer. This year, there's no Hader. The Padres are trying to cut money. So they signed some inexpensive Japanese guys. I think they're both Japanese. I know at least one is, but we'll talk about.
What Yuki Matsui is Japanese, Woo-Suk Go is Korean.
Okay, okay. So they signed two international players who are going to compete for the job. I think Robert Suarez has a good chance of being the closer. If I was a betting man, I'd bet on him being the closer to start the season. And the tiebreaker for me with Leclerc, because I really like Leclerc as well, was that Suarez is going to pitch in that Japan series to start the season. So that's a couple games of relief appearances I get from him, potentially, whether they're saves or holds.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good reasoning. Yeah, maybe Suarez has more immediate guys on his tail, but at least in the near future, he could be the guy. Yeah, and for that big week one matchup. And yeah, we said Andrew added Alex Lang, Tigers closer. People in this league like to trade for Tigers. I bet EBO could be trading for him any minute. I think he might be able to put Nick Lodolo on the IL actually too and pick up another guy. Maybe not. But yes, he's got hey, Yennier Cano might be getting some saves. Although Kimbrel's closing there, right?
Yeah, I think Kimbrel's going to be the full-time closer. They
Yeah,
signed
fair
him
enough.
for that role. Yeah.
Yeah, so Cano might get a couple saves, but Andrews already got Jordan Romano and Alexis Diaz. So solid bullpen here. Andrews got a lot of guys. He's going to save a lot of games uh, this year, this team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's a good addition for Andrew. I question whether Shelby Miller might take that job. I heard some rumblings about that. I mean, he had a fantastic year for the Dodgers last year, but Lang is a good pickup for him.
hmm And yeah, the other pickups, I guess the first guy who went off waivers, Anthony claimed Jake Cronenworth. Not definitely a big name, although not the most fantasy relevant guy currently. Um, the Drury picked up Clark Schmidt, kind of an interesting guy. You owned him at various points last season.
Yeah, I'm a Clark Schmidt fan. He's was a little frustrating to own at different times, but was a solid streamer at other times. He's young. I think it's a good gamble for them. Uh, certainly better than some of the older guys they're relying on, i.e. the Wade Miley's of the world. I'd rather take a guy with upside than a crusty old veteran who you kind of know what you're getting from, especially in the position they're at. So I think he was a good ad. I think Cronenworth is a fine ad for Anthony. I mean, he has definitely declined from his peak, but I still think there's going to be opportunities if he's able to kind of, get back to where he was his first couple of seasons and rack up some RBIs because I know they got rid of Soto, but that lineup ahead of him still with Tatis and Machado and Bogarts and some of the other names is still relatively strong. So um, he put up 88 RBIs as recently and 88 runs as recently as 22. So if he performs like he did in 21 or 22, it's a great ad for Anthony.
hmm No, absolutely. Yeah, and lastly, I picked up Mark Canna. I figured I was the only person who picked up two people. Um, I figured, I could use some outfield depth with my second spot that I have. Um, Canna, he's going to be a Brandon Nimmo type. He's going to hit 15 home runs. He's going to have a good on base percentage. I've always liked that type of player, very steady, very reliable. And, he's a Tiger, so someone maybe will trade for him.
Yeah, I've always been a huge fan of his. I tried to trade for him at different points to kind of be like a fifth outfielder slash backup outfielder on my team. OBP God, or maybe God's a little strong, but he's a very good OBP guy. And I think a
And
tie.
he's
Go
a
ahead.
great clubhouse guy too. I'm very excited to have him in my clubhouse, giving food recs to all the other players.
Exactly. Although you seem to not have a proper way of ordering your clubhouse. It looks like a mess every time I look at your team and Juan Soto sitting in your util spot and some random guy you picked up sitting in your outfield. Like it's just so wrong. But
Just for that, I'm moving Canna into my lineup and Aaron Judge to my bench.
you did do that last year. I made a comment about it, and you moved Judge and Soto to your util spots, and I specifically remember having an argument about this. We have an argument about this every year at this time. Um, but don't worry, I will be doing for those of you who don't remember last year, this is a total tangent, but I dropped and re-added all my players in a specific order so that it looked aesthetically pleasing to me every time I open up my team. And I haven't had a chance to do it yet, but I will be doing that again this year. I give Eric a heads up each year. I tell him nothing is involved of him. I'm just going to take care of it, and I'll figure we'll figure it out later. But yeah, I still need to do that.
Yeah, I think that's an insane thing to do. But anyway, so those are the ad drops here. I put a claim in on Jack Sawinski in case my Mark Canna deal didn't go through. Kind of an opposite type of guy of Canna, where he's gonna hit for some power, but not a super high in base. He'll strike out a bit, but he'll definitely get the power numbers here. He's also super young, so I like Jack Sawinski as well as a sleeper guy.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird profile. It's a fantasy profile that has some decent fantasy juice, but just like not the type of player that I think is particularly sustainable. So I don't blame you for putting Canha above him in your claim list.
Mm-hmm. But yes, anything else we want to talk about here in regards to the league opening back up, other than, how it's, one of the great harbingers of spring, maybe a little early this year?
You know what, there's one other thing I want to talk about, and that's the schedule for this year. So it's a little different with the Japan series. So if you all recall in previous years, the first week was a long week, but it went like for that like first stub, so that like Thursday through Sunday, and then it included the entirety of the next week. So it was like an 11-day matchup. This year, the Japan series uh they take those 2 days and then that like first stub, that Thursday through Sunday, so that first series for each team constitutes the first week. But even though that like Thursday through Sunday is 4 days, like most teams only play 3 of those days because they have the off day after opening day, for at least for the East Coast teams, to kind of make sure they have uh a backup in case opening day gets rained out. And just in general, I think there's a lot of those off days early on. So it's gonna kind of be it's gonna be weird to manage. We haven't had a short league like that in a while, to manage, let alone one to start the season. But also it means that we have 23 regular season matchups, I think.
And yeah, I do not like that. I think we've done 21 in the last few years.
Yeah, let me add this up quickly because now I'm thinking it might actually be 22 this year. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It is 22 matchups. Okay, so that means that in previous years there's been one team we've only played once. This year we will play every team twice. I like
Okay, it was 23 matchups a couple days ago. I think something must have gotten changed,
so
which is
it
good.
was two. It was two because the season used to go until the 8th. And I wonder if Eric changed that. Uh, he did update the league settings a couple times, but it doesn't indicate when you look through what the exact change was. So, um, I wonder if he just went back and did 22 weeks. Uh,
What we could do is we could make it 21 again and do a 2-week final.
the only issue is I don't think ESPN is set up for that. Uh,
Yeah.
they are it's either you do 2 weeks or every playoff matchup, or 2 weeks for or 1 week for every matchup.
Yeah. And I think it's probably too late in the league to suddenly do a 2-week final.
We did do it year one, but we only had four playoff teams, so that worked out. I do think what might have happened is, and I can look to when the actual season ends, but I wonder if taking off that extra week allows us to end the finals a week before the regular season ends, which I know we all greatly prefer. Uh,
Mhm.
okay, so the regular season ends Sunday, September 1st. Uh, if you go 1 week after that, it goes to the 8th. 1 week after this, so that's round one of the playoffs. 1 week after that goes to the 15th, round two of the playoffs. 1 week after that goes to the 22nd. That's when the finals would end. And then there's still a week of the regular season after that. So Eric must have just chopped off that week to ensure that we end the regulars, or we end the playoffs the week before the MLB regular season ends. So
And I think that's good. I think that was the right
yeah,
call.
oh, it is by far the right decision. So I'm happy with that. We've done that the past couple of years, if
Yeah.
not for almost the entirety of the league's history. So I think that's a right move. Um, I am looking forward to everybody playing the exact same schedule this year, but I'm not looking forward to that weird stub week. I don't think there's any other weeks like that, uh either long or short. There is a long week for the All-Star break. Last year I played Jake in both of our regular season long weeks. So here's hoping I don't play him for another regular season long week this year. It would be really funny if that was the case, though.
Yeah, no, I feel like I tend to get Eric in the long weeks. I also tend to get Eric in the weeks that I'm on vacation and not able to check my lineup as much. So hopefully that doesn't happen this year.
You,
Um,
you you did get me in one long week, I think in 21, where you would have beaten me in 7 days, but I beat you in 11 days.
that's right. I remember that. That would have been my first time ever beating you also.
Yeah, that one I like that better.
I did beat you later that season though.
Yeah, you did. But yeah, so Eric has yet to randomize his schedule. I think that's going to happen sooner rather than later, maybe even on draft day. That's something we have to talk to Eric about, but we will discuss the schedule on air, I'm sure, once that happens.
That's right. And speaking of draft day, um,
Great
we've
segue.
got yeah, our draft is coming up soon. Before we talk about the draft, you made a couple little minor moves with the draft in mind. The first couple of trades in a very long time.
Yeah, we almost had the perfect segue. Yeah, these are our first trades since November 2nd. Uh, we have not had a busy trade off season. Those were the fifth and sixth trades of the off season. I mean, like, for context, we had 52 trades the off season before this. Uh, we've had off seasons with as many as 93 trades. So six is kind of jarring, but I did make two a couple days ago. I traded your 2025 second to EBO for the 23rd overall pick and traded my 2026 second to Andrew for the 24th overall pick. Those were the two picks I got. And the last trade I made before this, the Tanner Scott and Mark Vientos for Bo Naylor and those second round pick trades. Basically, I wanted to get into this year's draft a little more. I had one third round pick previously. That was the last pick in the draft. And there's a couple teams that have a ton of draft picks, but don't really want to use all of them. So that kind of worked out nicely for everybody. And this is a kind of a move I make every year. So uh, I'm
Yeah,
looking for,
really, starting in 2021, you've kind of become a guy who trades into the draft to the last possible moment.
yeah.
And I think this year, 2021, maybe not the best idea because that was a bad draft. And you got PCA out of it, but you also gave up capital to end up drafting Ed Howard, which, did not work as well as we thought it would.
I
Um,
drafted Austin Wells with one of the picks I traded for. That one turned out well.
that's true.
But
But this draft, I think it's a great move because, it's a really good draft. And having more picks in this really good draft is a really good thing.
yep.
Um, yeah, no, don't need to make my analysis any more complicated than that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is a very good draft, and I think it's time that we talk about that very good draft.
Yeah, so this is our draft preview episode. That's our main segment here. We have a lot to talk about. We'll be kind of discussing some of the names, and eventually we'll be doing a full first round mock draft like we have in years past. Let's kind of break down some of the big stories here. First and foremost, Alex and Zach are picking number one. There is um, it's a tricky pick for them. They haven't really talked about it. We know who Jake would be taking if he was picking number one. Yes, if he had the number one pick, he's been vocal about that. We know EBO would be taking Yamamoto. And I'm still a little bit convinced Zane is going to find a way to trade up for number one to take Yamamoto. It's I don't know. It just Zane really likes Yamamoto. I could see him finding a way to do it. But it's neither of those teams that have the first overall pick. It is Alex who has been kind of quiet about it.
Yeah, what I will say is Alex very much does not care what everybody else thinks. Alex had the first overall pick last year. I think we were all expecting it to be Drew Jones, and he drafted Jackson Holiday. I think we are all surprised about that. We're like, hey, probably a valid pick, but like I think a lot of people had Drew Jones kind of in his own tier above kind of that next group, which was like Jackson Holiday, Terramar Johnson, and Elijah Green. And Alex ended up being right. I mean, Jackson Holiday, Baseball America just came out with their top prospect list yesterday, and Jackson Holiday is the number one overall prospect. Like, Alex made this slam dunk decision. So, um, I think he's going to do that again. I think there's two obvious choices for the number one overall pick, and it kind of goes. It's kind of based on what path he wants to go down. They're two very different paths. Does he want to take the major league ready pitcher, uh, who's still young, coming over from Japan, or does he want to go for the top hitter prospect in the draft? I don't think he could go wrong either way. And even then, beyond those two, like Dylan Cruz was widely projected to be the number one overall pick in most FYPDs immediately after the MLB draft. And then what ended up happening was like Langford just went like absolutely bananas. Cruz
Yeah,
would
I
be
mean, looking at our Gallardo FYP, Dylan Cruz was fourth overall and the first baseball player taken. So
right. Like, and Cruz was like, it's not like Cruz like flopped like after getting drafted. He was still very good. It's just like Langford was at a whole nother level. I think you could reasonably still argue that Cruz is a better player than Langford. I don't know if I'm there, but I think you could reasonably make that argument. Um,
yeah, I think a lot of the buzz around Langford is the fact that he's already in AAA,
yeah,
um, and he's gonna probably be in the majors pretty soon.
yeah.
Um,
On a good team
uh,
too, so that
yeah.
he'll be able to get a lot of RBIs and runs and have a lot of protection in that lineup.
hmm No, absolutely. So yeah, that's kind of um yeah, kind of those guys. The biggest another big story about this draft, speaking of guys who are going to be in the majors soon, is a guy who's already in the majors, Nolan Schanuel, who I think is the single most interesting player in this draft. Because not only has he debuted in the majors, unlike a lot of these international guys we'll talk about in a second, who will start the season in the majors, but kind of have 1 to 2 months before they hit the innings or at bat minimums. Schanuel is 30 at bats away, less than 30 at bats away. He will, by the end of like this first or second week of the year, teams will have to make a decision. Whichever team drafts him will have to decide whether they want to put him on the major league roster or not. And I was under the impression that he'd already exceeded it because I thought it was a plate appearances, not at bats. But so he's still got a little bit of time left, but he's shown a bit in the majors. He's looked good, but you just need to be ready to put him in a spot right away with no wiggle room for demoting him, and that's a tough sell for a lot of teams. And I'm very curious to see where he goes because of that.
See, but I also think the flip side of that is that he could be a really good sell for a lot of teams because they might be like, hey, unlike some of these prospects that we're drafting that, some of them maybe debuted and played a little bit in rookie ball or A ball, right? Like Shadowell made it to the majors and he was pretty damn good in the majors for a 21-year-old rookie. He walked more than he struck out in the majors. He only hit one home run in 132 plate appearances, but like the core skills were pretty solid. He had a 402 OBP with a BABIP that makes it seem like it was relatively sustainable. 326 is a little high, even if that BABIP goes down a bit. Like I don't think that OBP is going to drop a crazy amount. Um, so I think you can look at that and be like, hey, I know how he's going to perform in the majors to a degree. There's reason to believe that he could be even a little better with a full spring training under his belt starting the season in the majors. He could be an interesting ad. I think he's a better play for a rebuilding team than he is for a contending team because you're right, you do have to make that decision really early. Um, and he is only going to be first base eligible. So I think you do see some of these teams who are like contending teams who are like, hey, maybe he doesn't have enough power early on to really be a contributor at that position. But if I'm a rebuilding team, like he's the type of guy I'd love to take the gamble on. And if you're thinking about one of those teams who is clogging up their prospect list with a lot of guys, like why not have a guy who you draft who you could put in the majors from the get-go and not open up an extra prospect spot to help for the rebuild.
Yeah, I've got my eye on Anthony at 21.
Yeah.
Um, for him, Anthony's well, he just added Jake Cronenworth, who's first base eligible. His only other first base eligible guy is Alex Kirilloff.
Yeah.
Oh, Spencer Steert also, but he's playing Steer at third base because he's yeah, there's kind of a lot of he could. There's definitely a lot of room to move some of these guys around and get Sean Noel playing uh playing first base, and he can stash him a little bit if he becomes first base or if he loses prospect eligibility. I think that's kind of a good fit for him.
Yeah, I could see him going as high as Connor at 18 as well. I know Connor is a couple first basemen who are getting up there in age. But uh, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes somewhere in the second round. I think first round would be a reach, but anywhere he goes in the second round wouldn't totally surprise me, although I think higher in the round might be a little bit of a reach. I think he's a better real life player than a fantasy player because I think he's going to get on base quite a bit, but I'm not sure how the power is going to play.
Yeah, I agree. And he could definitely be like a 30, 40 doubles guy maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, that remains to be seen. I'm not sure I see the home run power either.
Right. And especially early on, right? Because he's 21. Maybe as he, 25, 26, 27, he develops a bit more power. And then also the team around him is hot garbage, especially with Otani no longer in that Angels lineup. So like um, you know, those runs and ribbies numbers aren't going to look particularly great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. And yeah, before we mock the first round, the last big story here, and the biggest story is just the huge number of international guys in this draft. I mean, we've mentioned Yamamoto, but of course, there's Shota Imanaga, who just signed with the Cubs. Um, it could be an interesting pick. I know where I have him graded, but a lot of these major league ready pitchers seem to go earlier than expected. So we could see him going kind of early. There's, of course, we have the two Padres relievers that we mentioned briefly earlier, uh, Go and Yuki Matsui. We don't know. I mean, they were maybe, and particularly Matsui is maybe signed to be the closer. Does a team take one of them in the third round and try and get some saves? I feel like I certainly would if I had some more clarity on that Padres bullpen situation. Um, could be for a winning team, a way to try and snag some saves there.
Yeah, and not only those guys, but Jung Ho Lee, the Giants handed him a massive contract. Also, Yariel Rodriguez, um, the Blue Jays just signed him a couple days ago. I know he is a pretty intriguing pitcher. He's got a really unique background. He didn't even pitch last year. Um, I'm curious to see how that one's gonna play out. And I feel like there's at least one more that we're missing here.
As far as major league ready guys, I think that's it. As for international youngsters, um, I feel like Leo DeVries, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, um, has gone super under the radar with all of these major league ready guys, but I think he's maybe the best international teenager since since Jason Dominguez.
Yeah.
And I think most years he could be a top five pick. Truly, I think he's that good. I've got um I've got him kind of uh well, I'm not going to give up my board here. But I will say, yeah, most years he could be a top five pick. I just think this year's board is so stacked and that people really haven't given him the attention he deserves because uh he's certainly, yeah, the best that we've seen in a while.
Yeah, no, I think he's a really interesting guy. I've only recently become acquainted with who he is. Uh Speaking of your whole point about how he's kind of falling a little bit under the radar, um, I think you're right. In other years, he might be going a bit higher. I think it also partially depends on, teams' appetites for taking some of these international guys. I mean, a lot of them are just very high risk, high reward. And I think there's some safer guys that teams could take in the first round. I mean, we'll discuss some of those names. And, I think it kind of depends on, what type of player teams are targeting. But he definitely deserves to go in this draft. I think he deserves to go relatively early. I think he is one of those players though that kind of has a wide range of outcomes, and the comp that I talked about off air with you, I don't think it's a perfect comp, but it's when Alex took Christian Vaquero in 2022. I don't think Vaquero is nearly as good of a player as DeVries, but Vaquero went a lot earlier than we thought. He went ninth overall. Whereas Roderick Arias, who I think a lot of us thought might go kind of late in the first round, early in the second, did not go until late in the second round. He was who a lot of people thought was the top international prospect that year. So I think that kind of goes to show kind of the wide variance in how some of these players are viewed. And I think that that logic could apply to DeVries as well. So we'll see how that.
Absolutely. I'm starting to wonder because it sounds like both of us were doing this. We were both kind of being a little bit purposely quiet on him to not tip any other teams off that we know about him.
Yeah.
Um, I know I was, and it sounds like you were too. And I wonder if other teams are doing that also.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. It worked last year, kind of, right? Like everybody, like Ethan Salas was the big name. I don't really recall a ton of us talking about him before the draft. Yuki kind of snagged him in the third round. I think some of us, like me included, were kind of like, "Hey, I'm hoping he slips a little bit." Uh, and maybe I get him in the third round, and then Yuki snagged him, and it worked out perfectly. So maybe that's the case again this year. Maybe it's just a product of, hey, not a lot has gone on in the league, so we're not really talking about a bunch of these prospects. Maybe he's just getting overshadowed by all the other interesting international free agents, which that also just wouldn't surprise me. So
Oh, that's definitely true. I will say, Ethan Salas, I had him 18th on my board last year. Um, I was would have taken him, but with my last pick, I took Jet Williams, who was 17th on my board. So Ethan Salas uh, very easily could have been on my team, but there was a guy like slightly better on the board, and I am happy with that pick.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the Ethan Salas type right now comes from the age, and like I get that, but you know, if he was 22, 23, right? Like a good age for the level that he's at, like how much are we talking about him? I
Right,
don't
but I mean, part of that just comes from the Padres' confidence in him, despite the age.
No, no, right, right. Like I agree, but I think there's going to be a bit of an adjustment going to the majors, and I get the confidence. Maybe I'm a little less confident because he's a catcher that's doing it, and there's going to be a lot on his plate defensively as well. Um,
Hmm.
just
No, absolutely.
to be clear, I think he's great. I think he's going to have a great major league career, but uh, I don't want to. I don't want the hype train to just go so far that we're not kind of recognizing what the potential downside is.
Hmm. Absolutely. But speaking of hype trains, are we ready to mock this first round?
Yeah, all right. Let's get started on this draft. So, Cam, do you want to take it away with our number one overall pick?
Yeah, so the way we're kind of picking these is the top half of the draft for first round we're kind of picking consensus. The back half I let Sahil left him to his own devices. Just because I'm picking 8 and 9. I don't want to give away any of my board, whereas Sahil doesn't pick till 23, 24. So he's definitely much more of a position to kind of talk about who he likes at 8 and 9. Um, so starting out number one, we decided it makes that Alex and Zach, if they still have this pick, by Monday, we'll be taking Wyatt Langford. Um, number one consensus guy as of now. Um, he tore up the minors this year. He's going to be in the majors very soon. They need their rebuilding team. They don't, even though Yamamoto's 25, they could use an impact prospect bat more than they could use a potential top tier starting pitcher. So Wyatt Langford, we are mocking number one to Alex and Zach.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, their pitching staff is pretty stacked with young players, right? It's Logan Gilbert, Shane Baz, Gavin Williams, Bobby Miller, Emmett Sheehan, Brian Wu, Ryan Pepio, Cole Reagans, Griffin Canning, Bryce Elder, Emmanuel Cosse. Like that's a good pitching staff. Pitching's not the issue with this team. What this team needs to be competitive is getting good young major league ready hitting, and I mean I think Wyatt Langford fits that bill perfectly. I mean, think about a team that starts the year with like I'm assuming Jackson Holiday starts the season in Baltimore. Uh, Alex Hardy is Julio Rodriguez. He has Jordan Walker. He has Anthony Volpe. He has Francisco Alvarez, Josh Naylor, like Ha-Seong Kim. You add Langford to that bunch pretty early in the season, and all of a sudden, I mean, I get it's an offense that's gonna have some lumps here as these players develop, but that's a really good young offensive nucleus. So I think that makes the most sense. I mean, I think we kind of discussed earlier, like, Yamamoto certainly could be in play for this pick, for a number of reasons. Dylan Cruz could potentially be in play for this pick, although I think Langford has moved ahead of him. Um, Alex is capable of surprises, so I wouldn't be surprised if he makes the pick that none of us expect. But I feel pretty comfortable saying that Langford's worth the pick at number one, and that's who Alex should and will take.
I agree. Um, yeah, so let's move on. Pick number two is Jake. And I think we both think he'll be taking Yamamoto, starting pitcher out of Japan. He's 25. He is, um, some people are saying he's a top 15 MLB starter already. One of the best pitchers in the world. He absolutely dominated the NPB. He's super young. He's going to be great. Jake gets another great arm in that rotation. Um, he's not super confident in Snell going forward. You can tell as much as he was enjoying the ride this year. Um, and he's got some good starters, certainly. I mean, Gosman is great. Um,
Castillo.
Luis Castillo is great. Frankie Montas, let's hope he's great. Luzardo and Bayo are interesting, but yeah, um, getting a name like Yamamoto could make this one of the top rotations in the league.
Yeah, I think so. Jake's in a win-win position here because I mean he could just take whichever one of Langford or Yamamoto that Alex doesn't take, and he'll sleep like a baby. Like he doesn't have to make that difficult decision. He just takes the other one. I do think Yamamoto is a better fit for his team. Jake has a lot of great young hitters. It's a good offensive nucleus that's set up for the future. I'm concerned about his pitching. I mean, I do agree about the top names there. Like I think Castillo Gosman is a great 1-2 punch atop the rotation. I have a bunch of concerns about Blake Snell, and you all have heard it like 20 times from me, so I'm not going to repeat that. I do have some concerns about Rodon as well. Luzardo and Bayo, I'm confident in both of them, but they have shown some volatility. So yes, like Jake needs some pitching depth there, and to be able to drop in a 25-year-old Yamamoto who just signed like the biggest free agent contract ever for a pitcher, I think would be an excellent fit for this rotation. I do caution a bit. We were talking about this off air that perhaps it doesn't go as smoothly to start out. Some of these players, when they transition over from Japan or Korea, take a little bit of time to figure it out. We have seen it kind of in the past couple years with some uneven debuts from Saya Suzuki and Masataka Yoshida, Ha-Seong Kim. So it's not always super easy. I mean, Kodai Sange even struggled the first part of this past season, but um, I think Yamamoto is going to be an elite player, and I think Jake will get a good one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, it's interesting. I mean, we've had several drafts now, several international major league ready guys have come over from Japan and Korea. Most of them have, kind of not been great, especially not right away with the team that drafted them. Um, so yeah, the guys who have been great, Suzuki and Kim, were cut before they could really break out with the team that drafted them. So I would call those missed picks. Really, it wasn't until this season when both international guys taken in the first round i.e. Senga and Yoshida both hit. Um, Before that, there really wasn't any sort of success. Obviously, this year Yoshida is the best international guy we've seen in the history of this league. So he's kind of in a different stratosphere. But um, in the past, we've kind of talked about throwing caution towards some of these guys. This year, it's that has not been something we've mentioned, but maybe something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, no, I agree. Definitely something to keep an eye out for. Um, but yeah, we'll see how that plays out. I do think Yamamoto might be a little bit of a different case, and it is shown by the contract that he got. One more thing I'll add before we go over to the next pick. I do think that for unlike Alex, who I think could be a little bit of a loose cannon and maybe not take one of these top two names that we mentioned, I do think for Jake, it's one or the other. It's either Langford or Yamamoto. I don't think like Alex takes one of Langford or Yamamoto at one, and then Jake decides to take Dylan Cruz or Paul Skeens. I think Jake is gonna get one of these two players.
Yeah, I think that's fair, unless Jake, unless we see Langford go one and EBO put together an insane package on the fly for number two pick. But that remains to be seen. Moving on now, pick number three is Anthony's. And we're kind of Anthony's in a tricky spot here at pick number three. We're gonna mock Paul Skeens to him, best pitcher in the draft.
Second best.
Yeah, best minor league pitcher in the draft. That is, Anthony likes the Pirates. He's, been a Quinn Priester owner before. Pirates pitching prospects. Getting a chance to get a guy who's as hyped as Skeens at number three. He's a guy who went number one in real life. Could have been the number one pick most years. Um, I will say Anthony does have a lot of starting pitching prospects already, so maybe he goes Cruz here instead. I think just with it being a Pirates guy, Anthony will find it hard to pass on him.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Uh, and it's not like Skeens is a bad pick. I don't know if I owned a third overall pick, I don't know if that's a pick I would want to make. I will say that last year, um, Anthony did have the number two overall pick, and rather than take Terramar Johnson, who went with the next pick, he did take Drew Jones. I think because he viewed Drew Jones as a tier above. So I do think if Anthony views Dylan Cruz as kind of a tier above Paul Skeens here, I don't think Anthony's going to hesitate to pick him. And I do think Dylan Cruz is the correct pick to make at number three. But I do see the argument for Paul Skeens to go ahead of Dylan Cruz in an FYPD draft, even though I don't necessarily agree with it. And I could certainly see Anthony using the fact that he's a Pirate as a tiebreaker.
Hmm. Absolutely. Moving on, pick number four. Um, that is EBO's pick, and we are going to be mocking Dylan Cruz to them. I think Dylan Cruz at four. I mean, if you can get Dylan Cruz at four, that's a great job. I mean, in the Gallardo Cup draft, he was fourth overall and the first baseball player taken. And I know a little bit has changed, and I know Yamamoto was not eligible for that draft, but um, uh, I think he's going to be a great major leaguer. He's kind of There's been a lot of Langford hype lately, but Dylan Cruz is good too.
Yeah, I think this is the best realistic outcome in the range of outcomes for EBOs if Dylan Cruz falls to four. I don't think that's gonna happen. I think there's a chance of it, but I still think Cruz is gonna go with three personally. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it would be a home run pick for EBO. I mean, they wouldn't have to think about it, and they would send in this pick if he is there. That being said, if Cruz does go at three, I think their decision does end up being a little tougher Um, uh, I think there's kind of a group there of like three or four names that they could go with that pick if that ends up being the case. We're going to talk about these names in a second here, so I'm not going to reveal them all. But um, if Cruz ends up going third, I think it's a pretty wide open decision at four.
I'd say so. Pick number five, though, is a little bit more complicated. A couple guys there. We've decided Walker Jenkins, though, best guy available, and that's who you'll be taking. Twins outfielder, yeah, really solid guy. Walker Jenkins,
Yeah, I think it.
college
Yeah,
outfielder.
I think he's the best player available at this point. I think there's a couple other players in the same tier as him, but I do think Jenkins is the best player in that tier. So I would go with Jenkins here. I think it's a solid pick by Yuki. Um, yeah, I think it'd be a good pick.
Yeah, yeah, kind
I,
of moving on.
no,
Uh,
I will say one more thing before we move on here. In a world where Skeens falls to five, if like Cruz goes at three and EBO picks one of the bats at four, I think it's a home run pick for Yuki, because Yuki desperately needs pitching. I mean, his offense is very solid. His pitching is hot garbage. Um, and that's saying it nicely, I think. So, uh, I think if Skeens happens to fall, I think that would be a really good pick for Yuki, from a need perspective. And I also think Skeens at five is kind of an appropriate place to take him.
I agree. Yeah, I think that'd be a good pick for Yuki if he fell there.
Yeah, I could also
Uh,
see with the Tigers connection, maybe Max Clark, but and maybe that's a tie.
mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah. Speaking of Tigers connection, Max Clark, that's who we think EBO is going to go with. I also think Zane will like taking a guy named Max. Um, for the whole EBO. Maybe he'll bring Max Smith in to announce it for the theatrics. Probably not. Um, I think, yeah, he's kind of the last guy in that tier. Maybe I mean, I'd say there's one more guy in that tier.
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, Max Clark is a solid pick at six, and I mean, I'd like it if he fell to me at eight, but he's not getting past EBO.
Yeah. I This is pretty much as soon as the draft order came out, I was pretty confident that Max Clark would be going six to EBO. I do think there's a chance that he goes four. If EBO decides, hey, we really like Clark, he's our boy, and like they have him atop the board after Langford Yamamoto, and in this scenario, Cruz is off the board. But I think six is probably the better spot for him. From a talent perspective, if they're really concerned about like Yuki sniping them on Cruz or on Clark, then I think they could go at four. But I think six is the right spot.
hmm and moving on to pick number seven, the last pick before my two, is Matt Shaw,
Yeah.
Cubs draft pick out of Maryland. He's a short guy with some power. He's kind of a guy who's risen up on a lot of the boards of a lot of savvy people lately, and Eric is a savvy person. He's kind of the prototypical shortstop guy who makes a lot of contact. However, in Shaw's case, he's got more power than a lot of those guys, so there could be some really good potential there.
Want to hear an insanely fun fact?
Sure.
This is a really good one. Eric is picking seventh uh, in this year's draft. How many times have you think he's picked seventh in league history?
Oh God. Uh, this is what, the sixth draft or seventh draft?
This is one, two, three, four, five, sixth draft.
All right, I'm gonna guess he's picked seven three times.
This is his fourth consecutive time picking seventh
Oh
overall.
my God.
So let's run through these quickly. Last year he took Brixley. The year before that he took Saya Suzuki, and the year before that he took Emerson Hancock. So he owns none of them now. Uh, And as a matter of fact, he traded both Lee and Suzuki. I don't know about Hancock off the top of my head. Like for like within a year, neither of them lasted a year on his roster. In fact, I don't think Brooks Lee even made it to the minor league season starting before he traded him. So that's a fun tidbit. Uh, Matt Shaw reminds me a lot of kind of the maybe not the exact type of player. I need to do a closer comparison of them, but kind of feels like the Brooks Lee pick in a lot of ways, and I think it'd be a home run pick for Eric. I think he is kind of the last player in a tier there, which is actually what I thought about Brooks Lee last year. I thought he was kind of the last player in a tier before there was a bit of a break, and I just think he's kind of a solid prospect that Eric adds to the farm system that he tends to do every year around this time. So I think it'd be a good pick for him.
Yeah, I agree. Brooks Lee's a pretty good comp.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Up next, I am up for two picks, and I am letting you make my two picks for me. Who are you mocking to me?
Yeah, I think you're gonna go one pitcher, one hitter. Let's start with the hitter. I think you're gonna take Colt Emerson at 8. The Seattle shortstop. He's a high school bat. Um, I think he's a little below some of the other names that we're discussing, but I think he's a really solid prospect. The Mariners, I feel like, have done a really good job recently with player development. Um, and he he kind of reminds me of the Matt Shaw pick in a sense of like, hey, I think he's just a really solid young shortstop prospect with a fair amount of room to grow and be a very solid major league regular. I think the difference there is Emerson is a high school bat and has a little more risk. But I think he'd be a very solid pick for you at 8.
Yeah, he kind of feels like the Cam Collier of this draft. He's super young on draft day, but really kind of rose up over the offseason, um, or over the after the draft, before our draft, kind of rose up some boards just because he had a great season, hit the ball super hard. Yeah, so that's kind of reminds me of Cam Collier's path to eventually getting picked fifth overall by Yuki last year.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think that's a better player comp than the Matt Shaw kind of Brooks Lee one that I was kind of alluding to. I think that's the perfect comparison for this draft. And then okay, so the player I think you're going to take ninth overall is Hurston Waldrep. I think he's the second best player that was, or second best pitcher that was drafted in the MLB draft. I think he's landed in a really good situation in the Atlanta organization. I think they do a really good job of pitching. Um, and when I'm kind of looking at the way your team is constructed, right? You have a lot of older pitchers. I think a lot of your youth right now comes on the hitting side. And I know that you do have a couple guys who I really like, and Connor Phillips, Jacob Mizorowski, um, and I forgot you traded away Ricky Tiedemann. I completely forgot about that. So Phillips and Mizorowski, who I think are going to come up shortly and could potentially help in the rotation. You have Jackson Ferris as well, and then a couple of guys kind of towards the bottom here. Santiago Suarez who just picked up, and Dylan Lesko, who I know missed most, if not all, of last year, but I really like the talent. But I think you would be well served kind of adding to that pitcher group. I think Waldrep could move up the Brave system relatively quickly, and potentially break into that rotation. I know the Braves have a couple older guys, Max Fried is going to be a free agent after this year, so maybe he's able to find an opening there. I think he'd be a good fit for your team.
Yeah, I agree. Waldrop's a good pick there. I will say there are four names that I'm looking at for those two spots, and Emerson and Waldrop are two of the four names that I'm looking at in those spots. So those are definitely guys that I'm considering, and I have not made my. I think I've made my final decision on 8, but I have not made my final decision on 9.
Interesting. Okay. That's assuming 1 through 7 goes the way that we've discussed, which I
And
will
if it does not, I will happily pounce on whoever drops.
Agreed. I will say I think there's a tier drop after seven. And I do expect that 1 through 7 is going to be the 7 players that we listed. What the order of those 7 players is, I think, is up for debate a bit. But I'm pretty confident that we're going to get to the eighth overall pick, and those 7 players that we mentioned are off the board. And I do
Mhm.
think that the players that you will be drafting from at 8 and 9 in other drafts would be going in that 5 to 7 range. But I think that this draft is so deep that, and we kind of alluded to this earlier when we were talking about DeVries, that you'll be able to get, uh, a really good talent, uh, in the back half of the first round here. So, um,
Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of this is a very deep, very strong draft, especially at the top.
agreed. I will say one more thing, and then we'll move on to Alex and Zach's pick. I would not be surprised if you move one. I don't think both, but one of these picks before the draft. If a good opportunity arises for you to improve the major league roster. And I think that this is something that you've been uh open to all off season. I know whether it's in our trade discussions or stuff I've seen you post in the big chat. Um, I'm we're close enough to the draft now where I don't know if that's going to happen for sure, but um, I would not be surprised if you're not making one of these 2 picks. I wouldn't be surprised if you're not making a ninth overall pick and somebody else's.
Well, it remains to be seen. We
Yeah.
shall see.
Yeah. Absolutely. I feel like we haven't talked about trades a ton in this draft, and I don't expect the first round to feature a ton of trades, although you did mention maybe EBO moving up to one, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is one big trade leading up to the draft that kind of shakes things up. I think there's some stuff going on in the background here. I think teams are finally realizing where they want to be in the draft. So
All right. So up next, picking at 10 is Alex and Zach. Who do you have them going with?
yeah, I think they could go a number of directions here. I'm just gonna go with who I think is the next best player on the board. So I did consider DeVries for them here. Alex does have a history of kind of going with those international guys with Vaquero. Um, the reason I'm not going to take DeVries here is twofold. One, we talked about DeVries at length already, and I want an excuse to talk about another player. But two, I think that, or I wonder if that experience with Vaquero has maybe made Alex a little more hesitant to go after one of those international guys. So um, I think he's going to go with Brock Wilken. Uh, he was drafted by the Brewers, third base prospect. Um, I think he feels more like your kind of prototypical kind of corner infielder. Uh, Alex needs bats. Uh, and I think the Brewers are going to have some openings here. I think they're going to start to, transition into a rebuild here. Burns is on the last year of his contract. Some other guys are kind of nearing free agency, Willie Adames. And I think that, with Wilkin being, a college bat, I think he can move relatively quickly through their system. And, there's definitely going to be some corner infield spots open for him. Given Alex's need for young major league ready hitting, I think Wilkin would be a really good fit for that roster.
Yeah, I agree. Wilkin rakes. He has so much power. He hit 31 home runs in this short college season. And he also doesn't strike out a ton, which um, is pretty rare for a guy who's kind of that mold, the Nolan Gorman type, the Mark Reynolds type, the power hitting, bopping third baseman. So to be a guy like that who doesn't come with the strikeouts could make Wilkin a very interesting name.
Absolutely. And I will say Alex has, I think, built up a lot of capital in terms of, or capital is the wrong word, but he's done a really good job over the past year, I feel like, of identifying the right prospects to draft and add. I mean, I think he's knocked it out of the park there. So, um, if he does end up kind of dipping back into the international market with somebody like DeVries, or maybe takes another name who I perceive as slightly lower, I give him the benefit of the doubt and kind of trust that he knows what he's doing here. But I think Wolkin is the best player left on the board that fits his team the best.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, definitely that holiday pick when none of us were expecting it really has earned him uh some some leeway in terms of his scouting.
Not only that, how about top 10 Baseball America prospect Samuel Basallo he picked up in the middle of the year?
Yeah, where on earth did he come from?
I still have no clue. One day he was just popping off, and I saw that Alex owned him, and I was like, well, shit. Uh, yeah, I almost this is a fun story. Alex and I at the deadline came pretty close to a deal that would have been Robbie Snelling, and I think I might have included a second smaller piece for Samuel Basallo. Uh, Ultimately, that didn't work out, and I pivoted and traded Robbie Snelling to Connor to get Josh Hader, but that certainly could be an interesting what if one day.
That could be. I mean, you certainly Josh Hader, is a guy you like to have. But yeah, could be a good what if you were right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, let's turn to the last pick in the first round.
Two picks, both
Two
Andrews.
picks. Sorry, yes, both Andrew. Um, this one's interesting. I'm again tempted to go DeVries here, but I'm going to take two college bats for Andrew here. I'm going to go Tommy Troy and Kyle Teal. Tommy Troy is a second baseman drafted by the Diamondbacks. Kyle Teal's a catcher drafted by the Red Sox. Catcher is definitely not Andrew's biggest need. But I think he is the best player available on the board. And I do think there's kind of a mini tier there with like Troy and Teal. And I didn't really see a good reason. I'm going to change this up. Uh, and I know exactly why I'm going to change this up. I'm still going to take Kyle Teal for Andrew, but I think he's going to take Shota Imanga at 12.
Ooh,
Yeah. And
interesting.
I think Andrew values the major league ready pitching. Andrew has been looking for pitching for a while. He has done a great job of acquiring some more pitching. In particular, I think that Tanner Bibby, Alexis Diaz, and he got one more pitcher in that trade. Um, who did he get? Oh, he got the Justin Steele. Like that really helped, but I still think Andrew's looking for young pitching. Imanaga's not quite young, but
He's 30, right?
yeah, he's 30, but that still has many productive years left. I do like that he doesn't walk a ton of batters. I think that that's the type of guy that Andrew would like to gamble on. And then I think Kyle Teal, while again maybe not the best fit for Andrew's roster, I think is probably the best bat left on the board. I do think he is somebody that Andrew could hypothetically package off in a trade later on if he wants to. And if not, honestly, like he's shown he's willing to go with the two catcher system this year. I'm not 100% convinced Jonah Heim's going to keep it up again this year. So if Kyle Teal comes up and he's raking, like I think Andrew could easily just keep him and roll with him. So, um,
Interesting pick.
yeah.
Um,
I will say, I think Imanaga is going to go earlier than some people think because he's major league ready. While I don't think the talent necessarily supports him going super early, I think he's more of a back of the rotation starter. I do think that there are going to be some contending teams who will push him up their board, and the tiebreaker for them is going to be, well, I need a pitcher, and he's ready to pitch, and I think he could be a solid contributor to the middle to the back end of my rotation. And I
mhm.
think when you reach the back half of the first round or the early part of the second round, I think that's an appropriate place to take that gamble, even though if you're ranking these guys purely on talent, I think you could reasonably argue that Imanaga is more of a mid-second round guy.
Yeah, that's kind of where I have him pegged, the mid-second round guy. But I agree, he's gonna probably in reality go earlier than that.
Right. I think the earliest he goes, if the draft order stays the same as it is right now, is 11. I don't think he's really a option for Alex at 10. Alex has the pitching already, and Imanaga is kind of older than his timeline. I'm not totally convinced you go Imanaga at 8 or 9. I think you're more looking for somebody like Waldrep as opposed to Imanaga. Um, and I certainly don't think he's going in the top 7. So I think 11 is kind of the earliest that he could go. Um, and I think if Andrew does take him in the back half of the first round, I do think that's an appropriate place for him to go. Uh,
Hmm.
Anything earlier than Andrew's current pick, and I think it starts to feel like a reach, in my opinion. But uh, yeah.
All right. But yeah, looking ahead here. So we only mocked the first round, but is there anyone that you're thinking could be going early in the second? I know, I mean, if Tommy Troy falls to the second round, teams will be very happy about that.
Yeah, I agree. I think Tommy Troy is one of those. I think there's maybe like 14-ish, 15 maybe names that I think could be first round guys. Um and obviously a couple of them are going to slip to the top of the second round. Um and I think that whoever gets them is going to get a pretty nice prospect at a discounted price that in a lot of years would be going in the back of the first round. So, I mean, Tommy Troy is one of them. Um, I think if teams want to go pitcher, Noble Meyer, I think is probably the next best pitcher on the board, with a shout out to Rhett Lauder as well, who I think is kind of in that tier. Um, there's quite a few high school hitters that I think could go in the second round. There's a pretty good group. Um, and
Yeah, I agree. I think Aiden Miller's a guy who can go early second round as well. He's
yeah,
kind of the closest to that tier, I would say.
Yeah, I'd say Arjun and Mala, Walker Martin, too, I think are two other solid high school hitters. Braden Taylor, if you want to go college hitter, is pretty solid. I think he's in that tier as well. Bryce Eldridge could be interesting. I mean, he's kind of the poor man's Shohei Ohtani. He can hit and pitch. Um, he's one of the ones I'm going to be a little interested in and kind of seeing where he lands. And um, it's interesting because I don't think it's 100% clear what his role is going to end up being. Maybe this is just me kind of lacking some knowledge on him, but what the Giants kind of plan on doing with him uh in the if they're going to let him hit and pitch, or if they're just going to have him pick one. So I think he's somebody who could have kind of a wider range of outcomes in our draft, but I'll be curious to see where he lands. Um, Last name I'll mention is Nolan Shanwell. I would not be surprised to see him go anywhere in the second round. That's another wide range of outcomes uh, type of guy. And I do think there's a number of teams drafting, especially early in that second round, who are pretty equipped to take the gamble on him.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, you've pretty much covered, yeah, Leo DeVries we've mentioned
Yeah.
as an early second round guy. And I guess you're picking 36, so you don't have to give up your deep sleepers, but there are definitely some interesting guys who could go late there. Um, I don't know, maybe you pick up one of the Padres closers to kind of, since they're um, pitching that first week. I think a guy like Johnny Mello, yeah, you can say his name in an Italian or in a New York accent.
Hey, I'm
Uh,
Johnny Formello. Yeah,
hey, I'm Johnny Mello.
yeah, you do it better than I do.
Yeah, he could be an interesting pick down there. I like Colin Houck, Dylan Head, some fun names there. Those are guys who could kind of deep third round sleepers, kind of that are on my mind, is interesting.
Yeah, shout out to some fun names as well. There's Giovanni Rodriguez. Giovanni, not spelled like Gallardo. It's spelled Yovanny, but uh he's fun. Let's see if there's any other fun names while we're here. These are guys I don't think are gonna get drafted, but Rock Riggio, Rock spelled ROC. That's an
Ah,
awesome
yes, I'm
baseball
familiar
name.
with that name.
Yeah, that is elite baseball name right there. Um, there's a Pujols here, Oscar Pujols. That's fun. Hmm,
Probably not.
probably not. There's another fun name. Where was this? I wanted to highlight it. See if I can find it. Nazan Zanatello is a fun name. That wasn't the one I was thinking of, but that is a fun name. Colton Ledbetter sounds an awful lot like Colton Bedwetter. Oh, Gino Groover. That's what I was thinking of. That
Dino Gruber.
what a
Yeah,
name.
that's a great name. He's a guy he could be he could be in that late third round mix.
Yeah, I don't know if I go that far, but I fully expect him to go undrafted, but yeah, he could potentially be interesting. One more name for you, Cannon Kemp with Cannon with a K. I think it's an awesome baseball name.
That's a great name.
Yeah. Um
All right.
yeah, I think that's gonna do it for a draft preview. Actually I do have one question for you. Uh we'll play a little over under here. Over under uh three draft trades. Draft trades meaning trades on draft day.
You know, I think I'll take the over.
Interesting. Okay. I'm gonna push. I think there's gonna be a couple trades in the lead up to the draft and the days before. That's gonna shake up the order sufficiently. And then I think that we'll see a couple minor like second or third round swaps later in the draft, but not quite early on.
Gotcha. We'll see. This is recording this Thursday. The hope is to get this up Saturday or Sunday. Um, and yeah, Monday night draft. We're definitely gonna be up before the draft. Obviously, I'll make sure of that. But yeah, gonna be a great draft. Definitely the most interesting one we've had in a while.
Yeah, I think this is by far the deepest draft we've had in years. I think by far the most interesting storylines. I mean, not just at the top with like uh the kind of elite uh you know uh players like Yamamoto and Langford, but I think there's a lot of intriguing questions kind of towards the middle of the draft as well. Players with some wide outcome potential outcomes, and I'm really excited. I think this is has the potential to be our best draft yet. I think the last two drafts almost feel like they've been building up to this. Like 22 wasn't a particularly good draft. 23 was a bit better at the top, but I think lacked some of the depth. I think this year has the elite talent at the top and it has the depth. So I'm really excited.
Absolutely. Yeah, 22 I remember being solid at the top, but really not having any depth. And that was the year with the mad scramble to trade out of the third round. Um, but yeah, this year
Oh,
definitely none of that. I would be happy to yeah, certainly planning on keeping my third round pick this year. Um,
that was ironically my best draft.
yeah,
Yeah, like by far. But
just
yeah,
goes to show.
yeah.
Um, anything else here that we want to go over before we wish everyone a happy draft?
Uh, no, I don't think so. Um, you know what? One more question for you, since we did the trades on draft day. Over under the number of trades in between now and the end of the draft. So including trades on draft day, I'm gonna set the number at 8.
Okay, 8. That
Yeah.
is um I missed the question.
Number of trades in between now 11:27 p.m. on Thursday, January 18th, and the conclusion of the draft. And
I'll
that
take the
includes
under. I'll take under
trades during
8.
the draft. Okay. I'm going to take the over because I'm going to be optimistic and say that somebody's going to make one deal. And I think that that's going to kind of release a little bit of a flow of trades. I think people are going to use this weekend to kind of make some trades.
Interesting. I guess we'll see. Um, I'm sure we'll get some. I think 8 feels like a lot, but maybe we'll be proven wrong, and there'll be a whole flurry of activity to talk about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I am super excited. It's been a little while since we've had a ton of substantive stuff to talk about. That was league specific. I know last week we did the uh, 2019 redraft. That was a ton of fun, but it's nice to actually have something that's going on in the present to talk about. So we will have a fun draft recap. Hopefully next week. It seems like we're on a more consistent recording schedule now. Fingers crossed that holds up to next week. But we'll see you all on the other side.
All right, see you for our post-draft coverage.
Yep. Until then.
This podcast is good.